Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bad Women Media Content Studio. I'm Tatiana Anderson.
And I'm Sonia Kennebeck, and our guest today is Athena Jones, journalist and documentary filmmaker.
Thank you for joining us, Athena.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
So, here where, because we don't actually have a title for this show. I don't know. We will get to that part later. Any ideas?
The show, the flagship show, the Bad Women Show.
I kind of feel like you juice the name of your company as much as you can. The name of this organization, you use it as often as you can. Why wouldn't you say the Bad Women Show, or the Bad Woman Show, or the bad, use bad somewhere in the title of the show. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, well that's a great idea, and for all the viewers, we will decide on a show name next episode. So be sure to join us for that. But Athena, for you, we want to know a little bit about you. If you were like at a party or something and you had to introduce yourself to people, what would you say about you?
Wow. Well, that's changed a bit in the last several months, or last less than a year, I guess I'd say, because for a long time I've been a broadcast journalist. And so that's still what I would describe myself as. I wouldn't necessarily say broadcast, but I'd say I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for more than 2 decades. I've worked all over the world. Most recently, I was in broadcast news at CNN for about 13 years. And I left there last summer to devote my time more fully to this documentary film project I've been working on now since 2020. So it's been several years, and I realized in some ways that I wasn't going to be able to make good progress on it while still working at a full-time, very, very demanding job. So I would say at a party, I'm a journalist making a film about Black women, breast cancer, and health equity.
So, why did you choose this topic for your first independent documentary film, Athena?
Yeah, I chose it because of my own story. At first, I was thinking about doing a shorter project. I met when I moved here to New York from DC several years ago. I met a documentary filmmaker on OkCupid, actually. So this started out as kind of a romantic pursuit. That person ended up, we became very good friends. He had a lot of experience making documentaries in Europe. And so after a couple of years of knowing each other, he said, what if we did a story about breast cancer? What if we somehow used your story of your two bouts with breast cancer in your 30s and did kind of a short film around that? And me being the journalist I was, and for a long time, the one kind of reporting the story, I wasn't that comfortable at first with the idea of it being all of a whole, even a short documentary, just on me, just on my experience with breast cancer. I thought that can't be that interesting. Lots of people have that had breast cancer. There's got to be a way to make this, I don't know, more important than just my experience. And so I thought about it a bit and did some research, and that's when I discovered maybe some statistics I already should have known, which is that Black women are much more likely to die of breast cancer than any other race. We're about 40% on average, nationwide, more likely to die of breast cancer than white women. And some people would say there's a Black breast cancer crisis going on. And so when I kind of saw the bigger picture, I decided that we should make this a bigger story and go way beyond me and try to examine this question of why are Black women most likely to die? What can be done about it? Let's, bring some solutions into the discussion, because I think that so much of what happens in this country with so many issues, big and small, is that people are just diagnosing the problem all day long. Here's the problem. Let's have a committee about this. Let's have a conference about this. Let's have multiple meetings about this over the course of years. But it's all just people talking about what the problem is, and we need to be focused on finding a solution. My hope is that this film will spark, conversation about that, and make people give this whole idea of Black women and breast cancer a lot more thought. And I hope that we won't just help Black women, but we'll help all women.
Well, conversation is a huge part of why we wanted to start Bad Women Media Content Studio. And on this as yet unnamed show, some of the topics that we are diving into are, loneliness, community, dating, and health. And so we were really excited to have you on because of the health aspect of your journey. And I know that you actually wrote about it. We've known each other, all of us have known each other for a very long time, and you wrote about what was going on with you very early in an article in Self magazine. What was going through your mind at the time that you actually decided to put yourself and your story center stage?
Well, it's interesting. It kind of all goes along the same theme of me kind of feeling like I'm reporting the story. I am not the story. I am telling the story. And I think the main reason, the main thing that pushed me in this whole direction is getting diagnosed at the age of 36, completely out of the blue, completely by chance. And I thought, in the end, I consider myself lucky to have caught my breast cancer early, because you always hear over and over again, early detection is key. The earlier you can catch any disease, of course, but the earlier you can catch cancer, it's usually 4 stages. If you can catch it at the earliest stage possible, you have a much higher chance of curing it. But for me, to think that I had a doctor who just happened to believe in offering her patients in their mid 30s baseline mammograms, that she happened to offer it to me, I happened to say yes, this was found, we were able to act on it. I was only 36, diagnosed a few years later at 39. That's all before anyone is really thinking about usually getting any kind of screening. And so for me, I felt like I need to be shouting from the rooftops about this. I can't express to you how little danger I thought I was in when it comes to anything, but certainly breast cancer. I always thought of it as an older disease, especially an older white woman's disease. I never really thought about it being something that might have impacted me in my 30s. And in all of my my research over the last several years, that's when I discovered that Black women are twice as likely as white women to be diagnosed before the age of 35. And Black women, just all ages, are twice as likely as white women to be diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, which is particularly aggressive and harder to treat, and even more important to catch early. And so when you have this combination of factors, I can't help but wonder, is the fact that we're getting it younger, kind of outside the age of screening, outside the screening discussion, getting it younger, more likely to get it more advanced stage, surely those things must have something to do with our higher death rate. And so I kind of became obsessed with getting the word out, making sure that more women are aware that this might happen to them. And doctors too, because I've come across in all these years dealing with this topic, I've come across, young women who were, let's say, 31, who goes into their doctor having a symptom. The doctor just insists it can't possibly be breast cancer. This young woman spends months arguing with her doctors, trying to make sure she can get screened. Come to find out, she has like stage 3 triple negative. This breast cancer camp I just went to, there was a 19-year-old woman. She was not Black, but a 19-year-old young white woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And her mother was there. Her mother also impacted, saying, these doctors are gaslighting these young women who go in with a real complaint and are being turned away. And then you get diagnosed, and it might be way far down the line. And you might be in a situation where the tumor is much bigger, or it has spread beyond the breast, or any number of really negative consequences. And so for me, coming out when my journey was ending, my sort of the acute part of it, I was nearing the end of the chemo of my second bout with cancer when I came out with this Self magazine article, because I really want women to at least consider getting a baseline screening, which is something, the baseline mammogram is something that was recommended by the American Cancer Society, 30, 40 years ago for about a decade. And they took away that recommendation for lots of reasons. But my concern is that early onset breast cancer and other cancers, it's a real thing. And this idea of having deciding who gets screened based only on age, mainly age and family history, but mainly age, I think it's leaving a lot of people out, and it's presenting a barrier to the kind of early detection that all of us should want. So that was a long answer, but that's it.
Yeah, but it's important. And you were just saying you were coming from this breast cancer camp. What I wonder, especially when you're diagnosed at such a young age, do you struggle with the question, why me? Like,
Absolutely.
why did I have to get it? What were the reasons or the causes? And it seems then, you meeting other people who've been through the same journey, that maybe that community is also helpful to deal with questions like that. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, two things. One, why me? Absolutely. First of all, I was never even looking to find out if I had breast cancer. So the whole thing kind of just threw me for a loop. And I felt I was too young. I was certain I was too young because I felt that if you could get breast cancer in your mid 30s, why isn't everyone talking about that? So definitely I had a very why me feeling at the time. But it was a unique situation for me when I was first diagnosed because I kept it pretty close. I didn't tell very many people because my mother was going through a much worse situation with a different kind of cancer, not breast cancer, not a gynecological cancer. And I just didn't want to spread it very much. But that's also the reason probably that I didn't end up finding a whole lot of support. I do recall going to at least one meeting. I feel like it was in like the Friendship Heights part of DC. I remember the subway and some sort of Elizabeth Arden event, or I don't know what was going on, but it was all older white women, and it just didn't feel like the place that I necessarily belonged. And so finding this group called the Breasties, and they hosted what's called Camp Breastie.
Great
they
name,
started
by the
this
way.
a few years ago. I know it's great. So the Breasties, it's not just women who've been impacted by breast cancer. They also include gynecological cancers like ovarian and cervical. Often those things end up going together, right? So if you have some of these genetic mutations like BRCA1 and 2, that can increase your chances of both breast and ovarian cancer. So this is a whole community, but they didn't even exist back when I was diagnosed. But had they existed, I am certain I would have benefited from that level of support. There were more than 600 women at this camp. The vast majority of them, I would say, are affected by breast cancer, and they include previvors. So these are folks who got the testing, got the genetic counseling, got the testing and the counseling, found out they had these genes, in this case BRCA1 and 2, that make them much more susceptible to getting breast and ovarian cancer by a certain age, and so they chose to have prophylactic mastectomy, so removing their breast tissue, maybe even their ovaries, just to try to make sure that they can avoid that illness. So you had folks like that. You also had people with stage 4, which you can live for a decade or more with stage 4. It is the last stage. It is incurable, metastatic breast cancer, it's called. But it was really inspiring in many ways, meeting women from across the whole spectrum. People still going through treatment, and it was educational. I mean, there were.
So what do you do together?
Well, there were all kinds of things. There was a lot of arts and crafts. There was getting to know each other. There was like a book exchange. I brought a book that I exchanged with someone else. I did a tie-dyed T-shirt. People painted lanterns. Some of them in honor of breasties who lost their battles. While we were there, we were only there for a weekend. 2 young women and 2 breasties, former members of this organization, lost their lives, and that was announced while we were there. There was a talent competition.
Don't
there were a lot of
Breast Fest. You have to talk about Breast Fest.
Oh yeah, that's Breastival. I'll get to that. There was
There's
a talent competition. People sang. Someone sang a song that they wrote. Others did a skit. But there was also a lot of education. I mean, there was this big pavilion in the center of the camp. We were all staying in like actual cabins with bunk beds, like we were children. But in the middle of this camp is a big pavilion, and that's where all of the kind of, you can call them the lectures or class meetings, I guess, were. And that's where they brought together panels, often with, say, an oncologist and maybe a therapist and maybe a PhD. So we heard from scholars, research, PhDs and MDs and people in between, activists and the like. And we learned a lot about kind of the state of breast cancer research, promising, new treatments that are coming out, news out of these annual conferences, these breast cancer conferences. But they also had conversations about, the after, dealing with intimacy and mental health and just interpersonal, not even just sexual relations, but just interpersonal relations. So it was really, really a wonderful time. And I think for me, it was just this huge numbers of people. I didn't feel alone necessarily during all of my during my bouts, but I certainly was the only person I knew when going through each of those treatments, I was the only person I knew had breast cancer. And so as supportive as my friends were, they didn't really know. So this was the first chance to be around a bunch of people who did know what it's like to go through this and what it's like to be dealing with the aftermath, or in many cases they were dealing with it ongoing. So
it sounds like this idea of community was so very important to the journey of your dealing with breast cancer twice. And it seems like that was something that you didn't know going into this, one, by virtue of the fact that you weren't sharing because you wanted to keep that close to you, and two, by virtue of the other fact that you just didn't know where your community was to share it with. So it seems like, you learned the value of that, but I'm wondering what other sort of lessons in retrospect that you learned on your journey that you think are important for others to know about who may be dealing with this right now.
You're absolutely right about this idea of community. I think that I looking back, one thing I do fundamentally believe is true, and I'll never know, but after my first bout with breast cancer, I consulted with the radiation oncologist about whether I should have radiation. It would have been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 7 weeks of radiation. That's usually every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And they do that as a sort of a supplemental treatment to make sure the cancer doesn't come back. At the time, in the discussion with this oncologist, I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's say she said my chance of breast cancer coming back were under 10%, somewhere in the mid single digits, let's say. And she said at the time that if I did radiation, that might cut the chances of recurrence from, let's say it was 8% to 4%. And I thought, those numbers are so small anyway, I'm not going to do it. And I didn't. And 3 years later, I was diagnosed again. Now, water under the bridge, can't go back in time. But I believe that had I been part of a community like the Breasties or like Harlem Share, which is another breast cancer support group, all Black, that I'm part of, but I didn't know about either of them at the time. But I think that if I had been surrounded by people going through what I was going through, I would have been able to, just like with the Breasties app, people are like, I'm going through this treatment or I'm taking this medication next. You ask questions of your community. And I think that had I been surrounded by a community like this, I probably would have gone ahead and taken that. I thought I was being very aggressive in treating my cancer the first time, but I would have been taking that next aggressive step. And so that's my advice. I mean, it's not so much like, I needed a second opinion. I felt absolutely certain that I needed to treat the cancer. And so I did treat it very aggressively with a double mastectomy at 36. But, I should have been just that step further aggressive. And so I would say to anyone who's, maybe at the very beginning of this process, to try to get as much information as you possibly can. Ask as many questions as you possibly can. Definitely try to find that support. There is so much support out there. Now, luckily, we have, social media is only getting bigger and stronger, more options there. These organizations like the Breasties, they have an app. There are all kinds of ways that you can connect with and be connected to other women going through this. And there's just a ton of people out there willing to offer whatever advice or knowledge or support they do have. And so I think that's the main thing I would say to anyone who's just beginning this process. Look for and find the support. If you look for it, you will find it. And these are people you can ask anything of. I think obviously your doctors are going to know things.
Athena, like one of the things, one of the reasons we are doing this conversation here, though, and the show is that there is a lot on social media, but as a journalist specifically, how do you find truthful information and accurate information? Because, especially around health and women's health, one of the things that we have come across, and we have a background in journalism as well, is that there is so much information that is really hard to fact check, and not reliable information, false information on social media. So maybe you can also, just to be helpful, share some of the resources or organizations where women and people can go to find, information from actual doctors, information that is based on research and studies? Can you maybe share some of your resources?
Sure. And I think this kind of applies across the board. I mean, obviously in health, I think it's even more important to be making sure that this information that you're relying on is true. But I think in many cases, one major way is to see if I can find this information in other places. So if I read something interesting, because I do this a lot, as you know, I mean, I'll read the paper and see an article and I'll read all the links in that article. And so it's that sort of thing. I want to be able to make sure that whatever information I'm coming across is, I guess, reproducible. Like I can find it somewhere else. But also, I know who some of the primary sources that I'm going to believe and rely on are going to be things like, national level organizations like the American Cancer Society or the Centers for Disease Control. There's a lot of changes going on with the administration, but there's still a lot of information to be found on the sites like that. The Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins. These are medical schools or medical institutions that are going to have actual doctors that you can. There may be articles, there may be studies, and in terms of research, there's the Journal of the American Medical Association. There's Science, there's Nature, there's all kinds of journals where you may be able to. First of all, some of this news is coming from, this information is coming from, and we'll cite back. So that's usually what I try to do if I come across something, especially something that I am thinking I'm going to act on, or something that I think is curious and I want to know more about. That's usually when I will go and dig deeper and try to figure out what are the reliable sources of information, not just a random person who doesn't have any kind of degree and whose credentials are not at all obvious on their Instagram or their TikTok. I'm going to try to find people who have the actual studies to support them behind their name, the letters behind their name, MD, PhD, etc., MPH, to make sure that who I'm getting my information from knows what they're talking about.
One of the things that sort of was mind-blowing to me as I watched you go through these 2 bouts of breast cancer is how you actually kept your life going. I mean, you worked full time, you scheduled work so that you could do chemotherapy in a way that you could recover over the weekend. And I suggest actually that people do go to that Self magazine article that you wrote if they want to learn more about those details. But, can you talk a little bit about how you sort of kept your life going? I mean, at one point you were dating during some of this, right? You were exercising, you were maintaining health. How were you able to do all of that? And what do you remember most about that journey when it comes to really normalizing the fact that you were a young working woman who was continuing to thrive while dealing with such a dramatic health issue?
Right. Well, the first time I was diagnosed, I was in my 30s, mid 30s, and I was dating someone. I had a boyfriend who was there to help me, support me through the recovery and but I also just had a double mastectomy. I just had one major surgery in the month of December, took the month off, went home for Christmas, extended Christmas break, had reconstruction several months later, and went on with my life, which seemed, I feel like I kind of got away with something looking back. The second time was when I had to go through not just surgery, but the 4.5 months of chemo and this 7 weeks of radiation. And I was not dating anyone at that time. But for me, knowing I was going to have to go through chemo for all these months, that it was going to be difficult, getting the diagnosis disrupted what I was already doing in terms of work, meaning I had to get off the campaign trail and end up posted at the White House. But the fact that I was, in a place that was where I could keep coming back to, it was a steady schedule. Basically, I was early shift at the White House. Every single day, I was there at either 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., maybe 7 a.m. at the latest. And so that's what I had to do to kind of, it was a way of keeping my mind off of things in some ways. Certainly people that I know have been diagnosed, chosen to take off of work. For me, I wanted the distraction, but I also was a really, high achieving journalist trying to do the best things and always, be the super achiever. And I was doing good things were happening in my career, and I was determined not to let my career be derailed by this illness. Now, keep in mind that I kept it kind of, not a total secret, but I didn't tell that many people either time. And so had I disappeared for several months, that certainly would have thrown a wrench into any efforts to keep it quiet. But for me, continuing to work was absolutely necessary, because otherwise I would have gone home and had all this time just to think woe is me about my situation. And you can kind of ruminate, and you can kind of spin yourself out of control in a negative direction if you have too much time. And the other thing was exercise. I was young, I was still in my 30s, still wanting to appear attractive for television, my television job, and then also still wanting to appear attractive to people in general, to men in general. So I was always exercising, because I wanted to make sure that, with the steroids you get with chemo, that can make you kind of more bloated, make you seem like you're gaining weight. You always imagine cancer being this situation where everyone's like skinny and withering away. That's not necessarily the case. You have steroids to help fight infections. And so I was just trying to keep going and just sort of plow ahead, like, okay, thank you, Lord, for this wonderful assignment of cancer. But I'm so glad. No, just kidding. But I mean, you get this diagnosis, but I tried to treat it as just sort of this thing that I had to do, this job, this class or assignment that I had to complete. And I just kept going and waiting to try to get to the end.
And that is also, I think, very remarkable about you, that you have this, and Tatiana can attest to it, this energy to just like go, and not having, not being by yourself at home, but when you have sort of a quiet moment, also to go outside, to go in nature, to go out with friends and with people and look forward, which is really what I've been learning from you, and getting this like inspiration from, that you're so so strong and driven, and I think like what you're sharing here really shows that again.
Well, thank you. I mean, what can you do? I feel like in some ways, we don't know what we have within us until we're challenged. You don't know how you're going to deal with a crisis or difficult moments in your life until you're in them. And I feel very lucky in many ways that I am a naturally optimistic person. Like, I'm not, obviously when horrible things happen, like I lost my mother, that was very depressing. I was depressed. Anyone would be. But I think in general, I mean, it's just kind of like with cancer. My second diagnosis, there was a moment in time where I got the news. I was out on assignment, and I could have gone and kind of, wallowed in my room and crawled up into a fetal position and cried all afternoon. But instead, that very day, I went and met the man who later became my TV agent, because I thought, you have two choices here. You can either wallow in misery and think, woe is me, and how am I going to deal with this? Or you can say, look, I got a problem. I'm going to deal with it. Just keep going forward. And so I think that, obviously my faith and my upbringing, my background, and just other things I've been through in life have shaped me into who I am. But I'm very grateful that I'm someone who feels like, okay, we got a problem here, but we're gonna figure out the solution. We're gonna find a way around it, over it, through it, under it, and we're gonna get to the other side. And I mean, I feel like, it's kind of like that saying, attitude is everything. It's easier said than done, but I do believe that if you can kind of psych yourself into the right attitude constantly, every time you need it, you can get a lot done in life, and with the right attitude.
I love that you shared that, and I think that that's a really great place to leave this conversation, because one of the things that we want to do here on Bad Women Media Content Studio is share stories of uplifting incidents in our lives, of joy through the challenges that we have. So to hear, what you went through, how you've overcome, and how you're actually now using that knowledge to help other people is exactly what we're all about. So I have to tell you, thank you, Athena Jones, my dear friend, for being here.
Thank you for having me, Tatiana. Thank you, Sonia. It was wonderful having this conversation with you guys.
And please join us again for our yet unnamed show. We will be back with another episode soon. Toodles, fans.
Bye.